This is Tom Phillips of Effective Agreements. I want to welcome you to the second part of the webinar, Common Problems when Structuring and Negotiating Agreements. This time the agenda, we're going to talk about the second of the three problems that we see pretty frequently, the wrong starting point for the agreement. And as before, we'll talk about the impact, something about a solution, and I'll throw in some more stories that hopefully will hold your interest and make the whole thing worthwhile. Okay, so what do I mean by the wrong starting point? Well, if you think about it, where do most agreements that small to mid-sized companies use come from? What really happens is some executive pulls an old document from his desk and he uses it because he thinks he's going to save time and money. So now what are you dealing with? You're dealing with a document that's of dubious origin, if you will. It came from a previous deal, probably. It may have even come from another company. And that other company might have even been in another industry or a completely different type of company. You might have a sales company now versus a manufacturing company there. You've got a disconnect. So what's the impact of that? The first thing is that the contract reflects the end point of the previous negotiation. And that's really important because concessions on important issues have already been reflected in the agreement you're working with. What I mean by that is, as you're negotiating that agreement, you have certain concessions you can give, and if you're doing a proper job of negotiating, you've got a plan of when you're going to give them and what you're going to get in return. So every concession you make should be traded for something of value. But remember, we're dealing with an agreement now that's already been negotiated. All of those concessions are already reflected in the document. They've been taken out. You no longer have them to trade. The other real concern is critical issues for the current agreement being omitted. One of the examples I can give is the lack of a maintenance process. That may not have been a factor before. Some of the time you can have a phantom maintenance process. I had one company where every agreement they had me working on for them, their basic sales agreement, promised that there would be maintenance according to their written maintenance policy. After about 2 of them, I asked, do you have a written maintenance policy? And of course the answer was, well, no. That was in there from the previous company. We had to stop everything, had to catch an engineer who knew how to do that kind of technical writing as well. And between the 2 of us, we were able to put together a maintenance policy and come up with a maintenance policy that was a money maker rather than a cost center. Isn't really as it should be. So, a little more on the impact. The tendency when you're working, starting with an old agreement, is going to go through in order. And you're going to address the points in the order that they appear in the agreement. And by the way, this is very common even if you're dealing with a proper agreement, and it's not really correct. There are things that are in the agreement that are linked that should be discussed and negotiated together, but they're not together in the agreement the way they're usually written. One example would be warranties and representations and the limits on liability. Warranties and representations are the things that you're going to promise, verily, these are absolutely true, there are no exceptions to it. Then you start talking about the liabilities in case they're not true somewhere else, and then somewhere else there's language that says, okay, we will take on liability if we were wrong when we claimed those warranties and representations, but there's going to be a limit on that liability. So all of that kind of thing puts you out of kilter, if you will, and talking about the wrong things at the wrong time. Another problem is you focus on the document too soon. You've got the detailed wording that you're arguing about before there's really a basic outline of a deal. That's not the best way to get to a real deal situation. I'll talk about that more in the solutions. I've seen some really extreme cases of these wrong agreements or these old agreements coming up to Baichen. In fact, I actually was involved in helping a company sell itself to Cisco Systems. Now, Cisco is a huge company. You would expect them to do this right, and they had mergers and acquisitions down to an art. They were sometimes doing 2 or 3 a week. But when working with this company, I finally had to tell them, we won't work on any more documents that you send us unless they actually have the name of the company in them once correctly. In other words, every copy they were sending had the name of the company they had bought last week. It never even addressed the company that they were talking about now. It's a little insulting, but it's also not correct. Okay, so from there, what are some of the solutions? I want to go through this carefully because this is what you may want to call the effective agreements approach, the way we think that an agreement really should be done. First of all, you should begin with an outline of the relevant points. And that outline should be as thorough as possible. In other words, it should just point out what are all of the things that you need to discuss and that need to be decided in order to end up with a good agreement. So you need to be as thorough as possible. One of the best ways to do that is to get input from all the subject matter experts. I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen people who get ready to go to work on an agreement and they've never talked to the accounting people. And there might be revenue recognition issues. They're signing up for a maintenance program, but nobody's talked to the maintenance people so that they can be prepared. They're talking about selling a new kind of product, but nobody's talked to the marketing people to see what it's going to cost. All of those sorts of things. Group the points that belong together in the same place and discuss them that way. This allows you to put together a negotiating plan where the gives and takes are a little more clear, but as I said previously, it puts things in the order that they really should be discussed. Then, what you do is you get with the other side, you lock yourselves in a conference room. It may take 2 or 3 days, and you work with them with a whiteboard or a flip chart, and you agree on bullet points on all of those major things that were covered in your outline. That outline keeps you honest and makes sure there are no errors of omission. Once you've agreed on the bullet points, circulate that. Make sure that everybody agrees that that's what was decided. Then you can go ahead and have someone with experience and knowledge draft from those bullet points and draft the commercial parts of the agreement and pass them on to the attorneys. Second commercial, that is one of the things that Effective Agreements does for its clients. Now, I can give you an example of this, and in fact, I have to admit, I did not invent this methodology. It was taught to me in this process. I was working at DSC again, and we had a company with whom we were doing a strategic alliance. They were a German company, and it was a member of their team who taught me this process. And we literally spent 3 days in a conference room with tons of flip charts and pulled off page after page after page. At the end of that time, I took it, drafted the agreement. It was relatively complex. This was a complex arrangement. We were going to sell their products in the United States. They were going to sell our products in Germany. We were going to develop joint products that both companies would be able to sell. They were going to have expats in the United States working on development and marketing. We were going to have expats in Germany working on development and marketing, and all of these things add complexity to the deal. I mean, just think about the expats. They really need someone they can go to if they're having a problem and things aren't working out. So we were successful in doing that, and that strategic alliance ran as smoothly as any I've ever seen or heard of since. If there were any problems, which were very, very rare because everybody had agreed and really understood what they had, I didn't go back to the agreement. I still had those flip charts up in a little cabinet in my office. Pull those down, look back to the flip charts, find out what we had decided, and that's how things were handled. This ends the second portion of the webinar, and I hope you'll download and listen to the third portion as well. Thank you.